In 1849, a man named Henry Brown mailed himself north in a wooden crate, 27 hours in the dark, kept alive by a little water and a few dry biscuits. But most who ran had no crate, no water, and no plan. They stepped into the night with empty hands and learned to eat whatever the land would give them. Number 14 on this list could kill you if you cooked it wrong. Number 3 grew wild along the very rivers they followed north. These foods were eaten in silence, in swamps, in the hours before dawn. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down 20 forgotten foods runaway slaves ate in secret escaping north. Number 20. The ash cake. Before there was anything else, there was cornmeal and fire. On the plantation, this was the food of the enslaved. Cornmeal mixed with a little water and salt, patted flat by hand, and buried directly in the hot ashes of the hearth. No pan, no oven, just the coals. When a person ran, they carried the knowledge in their hands. A runaway could kneel at a creek, wet a handful of meal in cupped palms, press it into a cake, and cook it on a flat stone tilted toward a tiny fire. The name came from the field itself. Some cooked the dough on the back of a hoe blade held over the embers, which is where the word hoe cake was born. The crust came out gritty and scorched and smelling faintly of wood smoke. It was the plainest food imaginable. It was also the difference between walking another 10 miles and lying down in the cold for good. Number 19. Parched corn. Fresh corn spoiled. Fire drew attention. So the smartest thing a person could carry was corn that had already been cooked and would never rot. Dried kernels were roasted in a skillet or over coals until they turned brown and hard and cracked between the teeth. Parched corn weighed almost nothing. A double handful fit in a coat pocket, and it kept for weeks in any weather. You could gnaw it slowly on the move, releasing a little energy with every step, or crush it against a rock and stir it into creek water to make a quick cold gruel. It made no smoke and needed no fire once it was parched. Native peoples had carried it across the same forests for centuries, and enslaved people learned the trick and improved on it. For someone crossing 100 miles of hostile country, a pocket of parched corn was a portable meal that asked for nothing and gave back everything. Number 18. Wild persimmons. Timing was everything with the persimmon, and knowing that timing could feed you or fool you. These small orange fruits hung from bare trees in late fall, exactly when many escapes began, after the harvest was in and before the deep snow closed the roads. Bite one too early, and it would pucker your whole mouth into a knot. The unripe fruit is fiercely astringent, almost inedible. But after the first hard frost, something changes. The cold breaks the fruit down and turns it soft and sweet as candy. A runaway who understood the seasons knew to wait for that frost and then eat free sugar straight off the branch. In a body running on almost nothing, that burst of sweetness was fuel and comfort in the same bite. The trees stood along old fence rows and forest edges all through the south, dropping fruit that most travelers walked right past. Number 17. Wild blackberries and brambles. For anyone who ran in the warm months, the fence rows were a pantry. Blackberries, dewberries, raspberries, and mulberries grew thick along creek banks, old fields, and the edges of the woods from June into August. Free calories, free vitamins. No fire, no smoke, no sound, no cooking, nothing that could give a person away. You simply reached in through the thorns and ate. But the bramble had a cruel side. The juice stained hands and lips and clothing a deep purple that would not wash out in a cold stream, and a slave catcher who knew what to look for could read those stains like a signpost. So people ate carefully, wiping their hands in the dirt, eating in the shadows. Even the safest food carried its own quiet risk out there. Number 16. Roasted sweet potatoes. The sweet potato was a plantation staple, which meant nearly every escapee knew exactly what to do with one. A few could be dug from the edge of a field at dusk or carried out in a sack. When it was safe to build a small fire, you buried them whole in the coals and let them slowly roast until the skins blistered and the insides turned soft and orange and impossibly sweet. Dense, filling, packed with the kind of slow energy that a walking body needed most. And here was the traveler's advantage. A roasted sweet potato tasted just as good cold the next morning, tucked in a pocket, eaten with dirty hands under a bush while the dogs were still miles behind. One potato could carry a person through a hungry afternoon and ask for nothing in return. Number 15. Hickory nuts and chestnuts. In the fall, the forest floor was covered in fat and protein for anyone who knew to look down. Hickory nuts, black walnuts, and above all, the American chestnut, which once grew so thick across the eastern woods that people said a squirrel could travel the whole Appalachian range on chestnut branches without touching the ground. These nuts were dense with calories, kept for weeks, and could be gathered by the pocketful in near silence. Cracking them was slow, patient work done in a hidden camp after dark. Here is the forgotten part. The great chestnut forests are gone now, wiped out by a blight in the early 1900s, so the tree that fed so many runaways barely exists anymore. The people who ran through those woods ate from a forest that no longer stands. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about this journey gets hard to hear. Almost none of this eating happened in daylight. Runaways moved at night and hid during the day, sleeping in swamps and haylofts and hollow trees while the search parties passed. They followed the water and they followed the sky, watching for the drinking gourd, the cluster of stars we call the Big Dipper, whose handle points to the North Star and the direction of freedom. And the whole time, they could rarely afford a fire. Smoke rose above the trees in daylight. Firelight glowed for miles in the dark. The smell of cooking carried straight to the noses of tracking dogs. So most of what these people ate, they ate cold, or raw, or barely warmed over embers small enough to hide under a cupped hand. The hunger was not just about finding food, it was about finding food you could eat without dying for the smoke. Number 14. Poke salad. This is the one that could kill you. Pokeweed grows tall and green all across the South, and in early spring its young leaves offered fresh food when almost nothing else was up. But the plant is poisonous. Raw, it will make you violently ill. Cooked wrong, it can still be deadly. The only safe way was learned and taught and remembered exactly. You picked only the youngest spring leaves, never the older plant, never the red stems or the berries. Then you boiled them, poured off every drop of the green water, boiled them again in fresh water, poured that off too, and sometimes did it a third time to leach out the poison. Get it right, and you had a nourishing plate of greens for free. Get it wrong, misjudge the plant's age, skip a boiling to save time, and it could be your last meal. This was survival that lived or died on knowledge passed hand to hand. Number 13. Sassafras. The sassafras tree was a small woodland pharmacy for anyone on the run. Its roots, dug up and boiled, made a warm reddish tea that took the edge off a freezing night and settled a starving stomach. The root itself could be chewed for the flavor and the faint lift it gave. The dried leaves, ground fine, thickened whatever thin stew a person could scrape together. Sassafras grew across the eastern woods in enormous numbers, easy to find once you knew the mitten-shaped leaves. On a night when the cold got into your bones and there was nothing to eat, a cup of sassafras tea over a hidden fire was warmth and something close to hope, and it cost nothing but the digging. Number 12. Muscadine grapes. Late summer into fall, the southern woods filled with wild grapes, muscadines and scuppernongs and fox grapes, hanging in heavy tangles from vines that climbed high into the trees. Thick-skinned, musky, intensely sweet and tart at the same time, They were bursting with the fast sugar a moving body craved. A runaway could strip a vine in minutes and eat on the walk, spitting the tough skins into the dark. They needed no fire, no tools, no preparation. Just reach up and pull. In a life measured out in cold cornmeal and empty stomachs, a mouthful of wild grapes was one of the few pure pleasures the road ever offered, and it doubled as real fuel for the miles ahead. Number 11. Wild honey. Finding a bee tree was like striking gold in the middle of the forest. A hollow trunk humming with bees meant pure sugar, the fastest and richest energy anything in the woods could give. Raiding it was dangerous, and a person already exhausted and hunted did not need a swarm of stings, but the reward was worth the risk. Honey delivered instant strength to a failing body, and unlike almost every other food out there, it never spoiled. What you did not eat, you could carry, wrapped in a leaf or a scrap of cloth, sweetness saved for the next hard day. In a journey with so little kindness in it, wild honey was one small taste of pure mercy pulled straight from a tree. Number 10. Crawfish. The routes north ran through creeks and swamps and slow muddy water, and that water was full of food for anyone willing to reach in. Crawfish, what many called crawdads, could be caught by hand in the shallows at night, pulled out from under rocks and roots without a single sound. No trap, no line, no gun to fire and give you away. Just quiet fingers in cold water. A person could gather a pile of them in an hour and boil them fast over a small fire, cracking the little shells for the sweet meat inside. Protein, gathered in silence, from the same swamp that hid a runaway from the men and dogs hunting the dry ground above. The wet places that made the journey miserable were also the places that kept people alive. Second pattern break. Here is something worth sitting with. This knowledge did not come from nowhere. Much of it crossed the ocean in the memories of the enslaved themselves, West African foodways and skills with roots and greens and grain that survived the Middle Passage in the minds of the people who were stolen. The rest was learned the hard way, on the plantation, where enslaved people were given barely enough to survive and had to fish, trap, forage, and garden in stolen hours just to keep their families fed. Every wild plant they could name, every animal they could catch without a gun, every poison they knew how to boil away, was survival knowledge earned under the worst conditions imaginable. And when the moment came to run, that knowledge became something more. It became the tools of freedom. Knowing which route would feed you and which would kill you was, in its own quiet way, an act of resistance. Number 9. Snapping turtle. For a starving traveler, a turtle was a feast on 4 short legs. Snapping turtles and other freshwater turtles lived in nearly every pond and slow stream along the way, and catching one made almost no noise at all. Under that hard shell was a surprising amount of meat, enough to keep a person going for days if it could be smoked or eaten in one long sitting. Turtle stew was actually prized food in that era, something even wealthy tables served. But for someone hiding in a swamp with an empty belly, a single turtle was pure fortune, a rare heavy meal in a life of scraps, and one that did not require firing a shot that could echo for miles. Number 8. Groundnuts. Under the soil along the riverbanks grew a food most people today have never heard of, the American groundnut, a wild vine that produced a string of starchy tubers something like small potatoes. Native peoples had dug them for generations, and enslaved people learned to find them too. They were filling, rich in starch, and, best of all, they grew underground, where no one passing by could see them. A runaway who knew the vine could dig a meal out of a muddy bank and roast the tubers in the coals. The hog peanut, another hidden wild bean, worked the same way. These buried foods were reliable in a way that berries and fruit never were, waiting quietly under the dirt through every season. Number 7. Chicory. Chicory grew wild in fields and along roadsides with its pale blue flowers, and every part of it had a use. The young greens could be eaten, but the real prize was the root, dug up, roasted dark and ground into a bitter drink that tasted enough like coffee to comfort a cold and weary body. For people who had spent their whole lives without such small luxuries, a warm, bitter cup at the end of a brutal night meant more than the calories in it. It meant a moment of feeling human. Chicory was cheap, wild, and everywhere, and the taste for it ran so deep in the South that people still drink coffee cut with chicory today, never thinking about where the habit came from. Number 6. Dandelion and wild greens. The land was covered in salad for anyone who could recognize it. Dandelion, lamb's quarters, dock, wild mustard, and watercress grew free and thick across fields, ditches, and clean cold streams. Watercress in particular liked the very running water that runaways followed, growing in bright green mats in the shallows. These greens were loaded with the vitamins and minerals a body running on cornmeal desperately needed, and most could be eaten raw on the spot, no fire required. A handful of bitter greens pulled from a stream bank was not a glamorous meal, but it filled a corner of the stomach and quietly kept the worst effects of starvation at bay, mile after mile. Number 5. Salt pork. The single most valuable thing a person could carry out of slavery was a piece of cured meat. Salt pork and smoked fatback, taken from the plantation smokehouse when the chance came, did not spoil, even in warm weather, even after days on the road. It delivered two things a walking, laboring body craved above all else: fat and salt. The fuel that kept muscles moving and replaced what was lost to sweat over long nights of walking. A single small piece could flavor a whole pot of greens or beans, stretching one scrap of meat across many meals. People guarded it, rationed it, and hid it. In a world of foraged roots and stolen minutes, salt pork was wealth you could eat. Third pattern break. Think about what it actually meant to eat like this. To crouch in a freezing swamp at 3 in the morning, gnawing cold parched corn, listening for dogs. To have found a handful of berries and to make yourself eat slowly so the stain would not give you away. To boil poison out of a plant 3 times because your life depended on getting it right. This was not a camping trip. This was a person walking toward a freedom they had never known, through country designed to catch them, eating whatever they could find without light, without warmth, and often without stopping. And they kept going. The food on this list was never really about flavor. It was about staying alive long enough to reach a place where a human being could finally be free. Every cold meal eaten in the dark was a small act of defiance against everything trying to drag them back. Number 4. Opossum and small game. When a person could catch meat without firing a shot, they did. Possum, raccoon, rabbit, and squirrel were all snared or trapped in simple loops of cord and bent saplings. Quiet work that made none of the noise a gun would. The opossum was especially prized because it carried a good layer of fat, and fat was survival. Roasted slowly over hidden coals, a possum could feed a person richly for the first time in days. Trapping took patience and skill, and it took knowledge of animal trails and habits that most escapees had learned as children on the plantation, snaring game to feed families the master would not feed. That old skill became a lifeline on the road north. Number 3. Cattail roots. Along the very rivers and marshes they followed toward freedom grew what some have called nature's grocery store. The cattail. Nearly every part of it could be eaten. The thick underground roots were packed with starch and could be roasted or pounded into a rough flour. The young green shoots in spring were tender and mild. The golden pollen in summer could be shaken off and mixed into cakes. And it was available in nearly every season, standing right there in the shallow water. For a runaway hiding in a swamp, exhausted and starving, a stand of cattails meant food that could not be seen from dry land, growing thick in the same water that covered a person's scent and slowed the dogs. Few foods on this entire journey were as reliable or as hidden in plain sight. Number 2. Catfish. The rivers were more than a path north. They were a moving pantry. Catfish lurked in the muddy southern waters, easy to catch on a simple hidden line baited with almost anything, and requiring no gun and no noise. A single good catfish was a real meal of protein, cooked quickly over embers, or, when a fire was too risky, carried and eaten cold. And the water gave twice. It fed a person, and it washed away the scent that tracking dogs hunted for, letting a runaway wade upstream and vanish from the trail. The same rivers that guided people by night fed them by day. For many, the sound of running water meant both direction and dinner. Number 1. Cornmeal. At the very top of this list is the food that appears in almost every story ever told about escaping slavery. Plain cornmeal. On the plantation, the weekly ration was often a single peck of corn, and so every enslaved person on earth knew intimately what could be done with ground corn and water. When people ran, many carried a small sack of meal tied to their bodies, and that sack fed them the entire way. Mixed with cold creek water, it became a raw gruel. Pressed into a cake and baked in ashes, it became bread. Cooked into mush over a hidden fire, it became a hot meal on a freezing night. Cornmeal was the thread that connected the life they were fleeing to the freedom they were walking toward, the food of their bondage carried in their hands to the free states in the north. It was the plainest food in the world, and more than anything else on this list, it is what got them there. Here is my challenge. Look up one of these foods this week, just one. The ash cake, the parched corn, the persimmon that only sweetens after the frost. Learn how it was made, and think about the hands that made it in the dark. Then drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you most. The poke salad boiled 3 times to pull the poison, or the cattail standing in the water like a secret. Because these were not just foods. They were courage you could hold in your hand, and they carried people all the way to freedom.